Happening now, President Trump's nominee for Secretary of Education, Linda McMahon, is taking questions from senators just a day after the president doubled down on his comments encouraging the would-be secretary to work herself out of a job. The hearing comes after two of President Trump's cabinet nominees soared through their final confirmation votes in the Senate. Brooke Rollins was confirmed as the new Secretary of Agriculture, and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. capped a contentious nomination for Secretary of Health and Human Services with a successful confirmation vote. There was only one Republican defector. Libby Dean has the details.
Drew, another key member of President Trump's cabinet just confirmed in the Senate RFK Jr. for Health and Human Services Secretary. He needed 51 votes to get across the finish line, and he just got this. Now that vote, largely along party lines, the Republican to keep an eye out for today was Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, because he voted against Tulsi Gabbard's confirmation on Wednesday as Director of National Intelligence. What we just saw, he voted against RFK Jr. again today. Now, some last-minute criticisms from Democrats on the floor saying that RFK Jr. Doesn't have the qualifications to be HHS Secretary, which oversees 13 agencies. Let's listen.
Which is more important to you? The health and well-being of your constituents, or blindly obeying orders, knowing full well the dangerous impacts your vote will enable?
So what comes next here for RFK Jr.? A swearing-in ceremony here at the White House this afternoon, and then he'll do what other cabinet secretaries have done, which is those day one directives that he's going to take at HHS. A source tells me that we are going to see an executive order signed by President Trump that does relate to HHS. So that's going to be something to keep an eye out for at the White House today. But RFK Jr. crossing the finish line, getting the Senate confirmation that he needed to lead the 13 agencies under HHS's umbrella. Drew?
News Nation's Libby Dean, thank you. For more on Trump's cabinet confirmations and other big stories we're following here in Washington, let's bring in the Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell. She's coming to us live from the U.S. Capitol. Hey, Michael, Mitch McConnell, he's the former Republican Senate Majority Leader, was that lone no vote on RFK Jr. He said this of Kennedy: he has a record of trafficking in dangerous conspiracy theories and eroding trust in public health institutions. How widespread are McConnell's views among Republican senators who are just too afraid to say that?
Yeah, I mean, Drew, it's a fair question and an interesting one. I'm not entirely sure, but really at the end of the day, that didn't matter because even if there were additional Republican concerns behind the scenes with RFK Jr.'s nomination, those were pushed to the side or buried by other agreements or concessions made by RFK Jr., what have you, to get the Republican support that he needed to get over the finish line. We know that RFK Jr. just a few hours ago was confirmed by the Senate. It was in that largely party line vote, Mitch McConnell being the only one to vote no. In the Senate right now, with the current margins, it would take at least 4 Republicans to vote against him or any nominee, assuming all Democrats vote no, in order for that nomination to be tanked. That is a very high number. So at the end of the day, regardless if there were additional concerns behind the scenes, those were very clearly pushed to the side, except for Mitch McConnell. And because of that, RFK Jr. will now be the next Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Also today on the Hill, the Senate Judiciary Committee advanced the nomination of Kash Patel to lead the FBI. Republicans ignoring warnings from Democrats who say Patel will use the Bureau to attack Trump's enemies, which Patel has advocated for. During the hearing, Patel promised not to politicize the FBI. What do you think we get from Patel on day one? Will it be a radical transformation of the FBI or more like traditional leadership we would get of the Bureau under a Republican president?
Yeah, it seems like all indications like it may be that very sweeping change. We know that Kash Patel has a lot of, talked about a lot of plans of visions he has for the FBI, clearing out the FBI headquarters, having a new team there. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw some of those sweeping actions come in really either the first day or the first few days of him being in this position. But I will note he still has to be confirmed first. And while he advanced out of the Judiciary Committee today along party lines, he is still going to face that A, procedural vote on the floor, and then B, that final confirmation vote. Nothing is a done deal when you talk about Congress up here, though, as we've seen, a lot of Trump's nominees have they have skated through. So I wouldn't say it's a done deal, but there's still a few steps before we start getting into what Kash Patel would actually do on day one.
And Trump's pick for Education Secretary Linda McMahon getting a hearing today before senators. Trump says he wants McMahon to work herself out of a job. He wants to shutter the Department of Education. He calls it a con job. During the hearing, senators from both parties asked the same question. Can the president close the Department of Education without Congress? McMahon said no. So I'm wondering, what are the chances that Trump can get lawmakers to sign off on this?
I think it's going to be tough because we know that Democrats are going to be very squarely opposed to this. We can at least assume that pretty certainly. And as we know with anything right now on Capitol Hill, you need unanimous support among Republicans to get things done because of this slim majority, particularly in the House, where Republican leadership only has a few votes to spare. So I think that this is a bit of a big goal that Republicans would have to get something like abolishing the Department of Education through Congress, particularly through the House, because of those margins, because you have a lot of moderate lawmakers who may be on the fence. But nonetheless, it's going to be interesting to see how tough Trump lobbies Congress to do something like this. We know that it was a campaign, something he talked about on the campaign trail, and something that he's been focused on. But if he's gonna try to force lawmakers on the line and Republican lawmakers on the line to get this done, that'll be an interesting dynamic.
So a heavy lift to get that through Congress, but Elon Musk is already taking aim at the Department of Education. His Department of Government Efficiency says it canceled almost $1 billion in contracts. So is the goal here from the Trump administration to bleed the Department of Education of resources through executive action?
I don't know if it could be done through executive action because of the power of the purse and the legislative branch having that. But one thing we're already hearing about, or really speculating, is will Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill try to enact some of Trump's wish lists and priorities through funding bills, government funding bills. That government funding deadline is now just about a month away. It's on March 14th. And we've already heard a lot of talk up here about if lawmakers will try to implement some of Trump's demands and policy wishes, for example, having to do with some of these agencies and departments in some of these appropriations bills. Now, I will note that we've also heard from the Democratic side that Democrats are going to try to use these appropriations bills to undo some of the things that Elon Musk and Trump have done. Both of these things very far-fetched because, again, with government funding, it needs to be bipartisan. But it's interesting to see sort of the dynamic of how these calls and demands from the White House are translating to Capitol Hill.
Over on the other end of the Capitol, the House Foreign Affairs Committee held a hearing today on USAID. It's the agency that provides humanitarian aid around the world. It's come under recent attack from Trump and Musk. Let's take a listen to the Republican chairman and the Democratic ranking member. Gives you a good idea of what both sides were saying today.
It's only fair to Americans if we can prove that a dollar is better spent going abroad than staying in the pocket of an American who is right now hustling and grinding it out at work.
Many Republicans have long championed U.S. foreign assistance as critical to our national security, as a source of United States soft power, and a key tool to outcompete China's growing global influence.
Michael, even Republicans said during the hearing that USAID is important to maintaining U.S. global influence. Do you think the backbone of the program will survive the Doge purge, or do Trump and Musk think soft power is a waste of money?
Look, I think that still remains to be seen, Drew. I also think that, I cover Congress. I'm in the Capitol, so I do always see things from the congressional perspective. Congress is likely to have to play a role in a lot of this when we talk about the funding, because Congress has the power of the purse. So again, it gets back to the idea of, well, Republicans have a very slim majority in the House. They only have a few votes to spare in the Senate. So to get anything, well, in the Senate, you need the Democratic filibuster anyway, but it's going to be so difficult to get any of this done. So we'll have to see how far Doge can go and how far Trump can go with the stroke of a pen through executive orders, and where that leaves him in his quest to upend all of these agencies. Because if Congress has to get involved, well, that's where things could get difficult and get limited because of the slim nature of the Republican control up here in the Capitol.
All right, great perspectives from Capitol Hill. Mychael Schnell, thanks so much.
Thanks, Drew.
As of Thursday morning, mass firings have begun across several federal agencies, starting with employees put on administrative leave at the Departments of Education and Small Business Administration. It comes as the White House says 77,000 federal employees, just over 3% of the federal workforce, have accepted the deferred resignation offer from the Trump administration. A judge Wednesday threw out the case that sought to block the offer. For more on this, we're bringing in constitutional law expert Robert McWhirter. Robert, thanks so much for taking the time. The judge here didn't actually throw out the case based on the legal arguments. Walk us through the decision, and is this the final word on Trump's buyout?
Well, it most certainly is not the final word. This case is going to go on. The judge didn't decide anything on the merits. What he basically just said is two things. They didn't exactly have standing, and they should have gone through the administrative agency process first for review within the agency before they take it to court. So they were a little premature in that. Now, Trump has also kind of blocked the efficacy of those administrative agency review. So they're going to be back in court in fairly short order here on this issue.
This is actually kind of an unusual legal win for the Trump administration here in its early stages. Many of the president's executive orders have been blocked by judges. Some Republican allies of the president say the judiciary is overstepping. Last week, Vice President Vance said judges aren't allowed to control the president's legitimate power. And yesterday, Elon Musk called for a wave of judicial impeachments. Robert, from your perspective, are the courts overstepping their bounds to block executive actions?
Absolutely not. This is what courts do when they get a case of controversy. First of all, the courts don't decide which cases they get to receive. People bring the cases to the courts. They're not like a prosecutorial agency that says, I'm going to go prosecute these guys. The courts just takes the cases that come to them, and they do the best they can. As far as judicial power, J.D. Vance might want to read Article 3 of the Constitution, which he was supposed to have done when he was in law school, but apparently didn't. If he would have written this down on a law school exam, he would have failed. The courts have a role in deciding these constitutional questions. And by the way, often courts rule against presidents. If you recall back in the Obama days, Obama wanted to do recess appointments in certain places. The Republicans decided that they would never go in recess in the Senate. So Obama just started making recess appointments, even though there wasn't a recess, and the Supreme Court shot him down. Now, he didn't go run around claiming that it was a weaponized court system at that point, nor should Donald Trump. Related to the issue of this being a win, it's really not a win on the merits. I think what this tells you is that the things Trump wants to do are just illegal, and these are easy questions that Republican-appointed judges and even some Trump-appointed judges are deciding rather quickly.
Democrats are warning of a looming constitutional crisis if Trump defies court orders. The White House has turned that around and said judges are weaponizing the bench, and that's the real crisis. Do you share any of those concerns about a constitutional crisis, or do you see this as a typical attempt by a president to push the extent of their power?
Oh, I think it is a very looming constitutional crisis. If there's an order that's issued and Trump decides not to follow it, it is a terrible constitutional crisis. J.D. Vance, for instance, a few weeks ago said, he quoted from Chief Justice John Marshall, who had decided for the Cherokee Nation in 1832. And President Andrew Jackson said, well, it's his ruling, let him enforce it. And it was a disgraceful example of American history where white people came in and stole the Cherokee Nation's land, sent them to Oklahoma in a trail of tears, and was basically a blot on American history and honor. Presidents can define it, but it does not go well for them in history, and it usually doesn't go well for them in the long run as this happens.
All right, we'll leave it at that. Robert McWhirter, thanks so much.
My great pleasure.
And that's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Drew Petrimoulx. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel, and come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.